Wrong building, sweetheart. The food stamps office is down the street. Officer Marcus Kane's words cut through the federal courthouse lobby as Sarah Washington approached the security checkpoint in her professional suit. Sarah pulled out her visitor's pass. "I have business here." Kane scoffed. "What business? Baby daddy locked up again?" "I'm here for a court proceeding, officer." "Sure you are." Kane's voice turned nasty. "People like you don't belong in real courtrooms." Sarah remained calm. "People like me?" "Don't play dumb." Kane stepped closer, his contempt obvious. "This isn't some ghetto drama show." Before Sarah could respond, Kane's hand cracked across her face. Her visitor's pass scattered to the floor. "Keep your fake papers and get out." Sarah touched her cheek, her eyes locked on Kane's badge. She slowly collected her documents while bystanders stared in shock. "Officer Kane," she said quietly, reading his nameplate. "I won't forget. Have you ever been completely underestimated because of how others saw you?" 2 weeks later, the federal courtroom buzzed with tension as the civil rights lawsuit Washington versus Kane began. Marcus Kane sat at the defendant's table, his lawyer whispering final instructions. This was his chance to control the narrative. Kane took the witness stand with the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences. 20 years of getting away with things had taught him that the system would protect him. His lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Peterson, began the questioning. "Officer Kane, please tell the court what happened on the morning of March 15th. Kane straightened his tie and looked directly at the jury. "I was performing my assigned duties at the courthouse security checkpoint when I observed a suspicious individual attempting to bypass standard protocols." "Can you describe this individual's behavior?" "The defendant was acting aggressively from the moment she approached my station. She refused to follow basic security procedures and became hostile when I attempted to verify her credentials." Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table, representing herself. She made notes but showed no emotion as Kane continued his fabricated version of events. "When I asked to examine her documentation, she became physically aggressive. She advanced toward me in a threatening manner, forcing me to respond according to my defensive training protocols." Peterson nodded sympathetically. "And what did this defensive response entail?" "I was forced to restrain the individual when she became a clear threat to courthouse security. Everything I did was within departmental guidelines for threat assessment and public safety." The prosecutor, a young woman named Martinez who was assisting Sarah's case, objected. "Your Honor, the defendant is characterizing assault as restraint. Sustained. The witness will stick to factual descriptions of his actions." Kane's jaw tightened. "I made minimal physical contact to neutralize what I perceived as an imminent threat to myself and courthouse personnel." "Officer Kane," Peterson continued, "in your 20 years of service, have you ever been accused of inappropriate conduct?" "Never. My record is spotless. I've received commendations for my dedication to public safety and professional conduct. I've protected this courthouse from genuine threats for 2 decades. Kane's voice grew more confident. What happened that day was a textbook example of proper security protocol. The individual was attempting to gain unauthorized access using suspicious documentation. When confronted, she became belligerent and aggressive. Can you elaborate on the suspicious nature of her documentation? The papers appeared hastily prepared, possibly forged. In my experience, genuine court documents have specific security features that were absent from her materials. Sarah's pen stopped moving. She looked up at Kane with an expression of quiet disbelief. Kane continued his performance. "I've seen every type of fake credential imaginable. Drug dealers, gang members, people trying to smuggle contraband into the courthouse. This individual fit the profile perfectly." "What profile is that, Officer Kane?" "Someone with no legitimate business in a federal courthouse attempting to gain access through deception and intimidation." Martinez stood again. "Objection. The witness is making character assumptions without foundation. Overruled. The witness may describe his professional assessment. Kane smiled slightly. My professional assessment was that this individual posed a potential security risk. Her demeanor, her confrontational attitude, and her suspicious documentation all raised red flags. Did you attempt to de-escalate the situation? Absolutely. I repeatedly asked her to comply with standard procedures. I explained courthouse policies calmly and professionally. She refused to cooperate at every turn. Kane was hitting his stride now, embellishing his story with practiced ease. When she began advancing aggressively toward the security station, I had to make a split-second decision to protect myself and others. In your training, how are officers instructed to handle such situations? We're taught to use the minimum force necessary to neutralize a threat. That's exactly what I did. I used a standard defensive technique to create distance and prevent further escalation. Kane's body language radiated confidence. He'd told similar stories before review boards, and they'd always accepted his version of events. Officer Kane, was there any racial motivation in your actions that day? Absolutely not. I treat every person who enters this courthouse with equal professionalism regardless of their background. I've been protecting people of all races and ethnicities for 20 years. Kane looked directly at Sarah. If this individual had been white, Asian, Hispanic, or any other ethnicity, my response would have been identical. I assess threats based on behavior, not appearance. The lie came so easily that Kane almost believed it himself. Furthermore, Kane continued, I believe this lawsuit is nothing more than an attempt to capitalize on current social tensions. The plaintiff is trying to turn a routine security incident into something it wasn't. Martinez objected again, but the judge allowed Kane to finish his thought. I've seen this pattern before. Someone breaks courthouse rules, gets held accountable, then claims discrimination to avoid responsibility. It undermines the real struggles of people who face actual prejudice. Kane's lawyer presented edited body cam footage that conveniently started after the initial confrontation. The video showed Sarah appearing to move toward Kane, with the audio carefully edited to remove his provocative comments. This footage clearly shows the plaintiff advancing aggressively, Peterson explained to the jury. Officer Kane's response was measured and appropriate. Two fellow officers, Jenkins and Rodriguez, testified as character witnesses. They praised Kane's professionalism and dedication, describing him as a mentor and role model. Marcus has always treated everyone fairly, Jenkins testified. He's one of the most respectful officers I've ever worked with. Rodriguez nodded in agreement. In all my years working with Officer Kane, I've never witnessed any inappropriate behavior. He goes above and beyond to help people navigate the courthouse system. Kane returned to the stand for redirect examination, his confidence now bordering on arrogance. Officer Kane, how has this false accusation affected you and your family? Kane's voice took on a wounded tone. It's been devastating. My wife and children have had to endure public scrutiny and accusations. My 20-year reputation has been unfairly tarnished by someone seeking a financial windfall. Do you regret your actions that day? I regret that this individual chose to escalate a routine security check into a confrontation. I regret that she's chosen to pursue this frivolous lawsuit instead of taking responsibility for her behavior. Kane looked at the jury with practiced sincerity. I've dedicated my career to protecting people and ensuring courthouse security. I won't apologize for doing my job professionally and effectively. As Kane stepped down from the witness stand, he felt satisfied with his performance. He'd painted Sarah as an aggressive opportunist and himself as a dedicated public servant. His edited video evidence supported his story, and his character witnesses had vouched for his integrity. Kane glanced at Sarah with barely concealed contempt. She was still taking notes, still maintaining that irritating composure. But he was confident that the jury would see through her act. After all, who were they going to believe? A respected law enforcement officer with 20 years of service, or someone who clearly didn't belong in their courtroom. The system had protected Kane before, and he was certain it would protect him again. He had no idea that his carefully constructed lies were about to crumble in ways he never imagined possible. When Sarah Washington rose to take the witness stand, the courtroom fell silent. Her movements were deliberate, graceful, carrying an authority that seemed to fill the space around her. She wore a navy blue suit that spoke of understated power, and her leather briefcase, clearly expensive and well-organized, sat prominently at the plaintiff's table. "Please state your name for the record," she said, representing herself as plaintiff. "Sarah Elizabeth Washington." "Miss Washington, please tell the court what happened on March 15th at the federal courthouse." Sarah's voice was calm, precise, the kind of voice that commanded attention without demanding it. "I arrived at the courthouse at approximately 9:15 a.m. for legitimate business. I approached the security checkpoint with proper identification and a valid visitor's pass." Kane shifted uncomfortably at the defendant's table as Sarah continued. "Officer Kane immediately made assumptions about my presence. Without examining my credentials, he directed me to leave, suggesting I belonged at the welfare office instead." Sarah paused, checking her notes. Notes that were meticulously organized in what appeared to be a legal folder with multiple tabs and color-coded sections. "When I attempted to show my visitor's pass, Officer Kane made several derogatory comments about my character and background. He asked if my baby daddy was locked up again and stated that people like me don't belong in real courtrooms." "How did you respond to these comments?" "I remained calm and attempted to explain that I had legitimate business at the courthouse. I did not raise my voice, make any threatening gestures, or behave aggressively in any way." Sarah's composure was remarkable. Even recounting the humiliation, her voice never wavered, her professionalism never cracked. "Then what happened?" "Officer Kane struck me across the face with an open palm. The force was sufficient to leave a visible mark and cause my visitor's pass to fall to the floor." Kane's lawyer, Peterson, objected. "Your Honor, the plaintiff is characterizing a defensive restraint as an assault." Sarah turned slightly toward Peterson, and for just a moment something flickered in her eyes, not anger, but a kind of knowing patience that suggested she'd dealt with men like him before. Sustained. "The witness will describe the physical contact without characterization. Officer Kane made contact with my face using his open palm. The contact was forceful enough to turn my head and cause a stinging sensation that lasted several minutes." Sarah reached into her briefcase and produced a manila folder. "I have medical documentation of the resulting contusion, photographed 3 hours after the incident." The photos were passed to the jury. Clear evidence of bruising on Sarah's left cheek, with the distinct pattern of finger marks visible. "Miss Washington, what did you do after this physical contact occurred?" "I collected my documents from the floor and read Officer Kane's name tag aloud to ensure I had his correct identification. I then left the courthouse and immediately sought medical attention for documentation purposes." Peterson stood for cross-examination, clearly expecting to rattle this pro se plaintiff. "Miss Washington, isn't it true that you were attempting to gain unauthorized access to restricted courthouse areas?" "No. I had a valid visitor's pass for the specific proceedings I intended to observe." "And what proceedings were those?" Sarah glanced at her expensive watch, a subtle movement that somehow conveyed both punctuality and authority. "I was there to observe police reform hearings as an interested citizen." "An interested citizen? What qualifies your interest in police reform?" Something almost resembling a smile crossed Sarah's face. "I have extensive experience with police accountability measures and departmental oversight protocols." Peterson pressed on, unaware he was walking into a trap. "What kind of experience could you possibly have with police oversight?" "I've studied various reform implementation strategies and have particular familiarity with Officer Kane's service record and approach to community relations." Kane leaned forward, whispering urgently to Peterson. How could this woman know about his service record? Miss Washington, are you suggesting you researched Officer Kane before this incident? I'm saying I'm quite familiar with patterns of misconduct and the institutional failures that enable them. Sarah's legal knowledge was becoming increasingly apparent. She objected to several of Peterson's questions with precise citations of procedural rules, demonstrating an understanding of courtroom protocol that seemed far beyond what a typical plaintiff would possess. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is asking compound questions and assuming facts not in evidence. Sustained. Peterson looked flustered. This wasn't going as planned. Miss Washington, why are you representing yourself instead of hiring qualified counsel? I believe I'm quite qualified to represent my own interests in this matter. But surely someone with actual legal training would be more appropriate. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained. Sarah checked her watch again. 1:45 p.m. She seemed to be keeping track of something specific. Miss Washington, what do you hope to gain from this lawsuit? Justice, accountability, and assurance that what happened to me doesn't happen to others. Are you seeking monetary damages? I'm seeking systemic change. The money, if awarded, will be donated to police bias training programs. This answer clearly surprised Peterson. Most civil rights plaintiffs were primarily interested in financial compensation. You're not interested in personal financial gain? No. This case is about institutional accountability and the abuse of power. Sarah's responses were becoming more confident, more authoritative. She spoke about police procedures and civil rights law with the precision of someone deeply familiar with both. Miss Washington, how do you explain your extensive knowledge of police procedures and legal protocols? Sarah smiled. A real smile this time, one that suggested she was looking forward to something. All will become clear very soon. She checked her watch once more. 1:52 p.m. In fact, I have a very important appointment at 2 p.m. that may provide additional context for these proceedings. The judge looked puzzled. Miss Washington, are you requesting a recess? Not requesting, Your Honor, but I believe the court may find it beneficial when my 2 p.m. appointment arrives. Kane was growing increasingly agitated. Something about Sarah's confidence, her legal knowledge, her mysterious references to his service record, none of it made sense. Miss Washington, Peterson continued, isn't it true that you're simply an activist seeking to profit from false allegations of racism? Sarah's composure never broke, but her voice carried a new edge of authority. Counselor, I think you'll find that assumption to be poorly informed. At exactly 1:58 p.m., Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and that knowing smile returned. Your Honor, I believe my 2 p.m. appointment has arrived at the courthouse. With the court's permission, I think this individual's presence may shed considerable light on these proceedings. The courtroom stirred with curiosity. Kane shifted nervously, sensing that something was about to go very wrong for him, but having no idea what. Sarah Washington sat back in her chair, the picture of calm confidence, as if she'd been orchestrating this entire moment from the very beginning. The evening before the court hearing, Sarah Washington had found Sarah Washington in her home office, surrounded by the quiet symbols of a life dedicated to justice. The walls told a story that Marcus Kane could never have imagined. Police Academy graduation photos, FBI training certificates, commendations for Detective of the Year, and community service excellence. A law degree from Howard University hung prominently beside photos of Sarah in various police uniforms spanning 20 years of service. But tonight, Sarah's attention was focused on a thick manila folder labeled Kane, Marcus, Personnel Review. 15 misconduct complaints spread across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. 8 of them had been dismissed without proper investigation, buried under procedural technicalities and institutional protection. Another pattern of abuse, Sarah murmured, reviewing case files that showed Kane consistently targeting people of color for additional screening that somehow never identified actual threats. Her laptop displayed a video call with Police Commissioner Reynolds, who was reviewing final preparations for tomorrow's announcement. "The timing is perfect, Sarah," Reynolds said through the screen. "The swearing-in ceremony at 2 p.m. will send a clear message about our commitment to accountability and reform." Sarah nodded, her mind already focused on the complex choreography of tomorrow's events. Kane has no idea what's coming. His arrogance will be his downfall. The office door opened and Sarah's 17-year-old daughter Maya entered with a concerned expression. She'd seen the courthouse incident video on social media, along with thousands of others who'd shared and commented on the injustice. "Mom, why are you suing that cop yourself? Why not just hire a lawyer and move on?" Sarah looked up from her files, seeing in her daughter's face the same questions that would soon be answered in the most dramatic way possible. "Because sometimes, baby girl, justice requires more than just winning a case. Sometimes it requires changing the entire system." Maya sat on the edge of the desk, careful not to disturb the organized evidence. "But it's dangerous, right? Going up against the police when you're—" She gestured at her own brown skin. "When I'm black?" Sarah smiled. "Maya, tomorrow you're going to learn something important about power. Real power doesn't come from the uniform or the badge. It comes from competence, integrity, and the courage to use both when it matters most." Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Chief Johnson, retired, her mentor from her early days in law enforcement, the man who'd guided her rise through the ranks when others doubted a black woman could lead. "Tomorrow's the day, Sarah." Chief Johnson's gravelly voice carried both pride and concern. "You sure you're ready for this?" "I've been ready for 20 years, Chief." Kane represents everything wrong with police culture. The assumption that badge equals immunity, that certain people don't deserve respect or dignity. "And when you reveal who you are?" Sarah's voice hardened with determination. "Then Kane learns that the woman he thought he could humiliate with impunity is about to become his commanding officer." Chief Johnson chuckled. "I almost feel sorry for him." Almost. After the call, Sarah returned to her preparation ritual. She practiced her closing arguments while organizing evidence files with the precision of someone who'd built cases that ended careers. Her uniform hung ready in the closet, dress blues with 3 stars that would tomorrow transform her from plaintiff to police chief in a single moment. Maya watched her mother's methodical preparation with growing admiration. "Mom, you've been planning this whole thing, haven't you?" "Planning for justice?" "Yes, but Kane made his own choices, baby. I'm just ensuring those choices have consequences." Sarah set multiple alarms on her phone: 6 a.m. for final case review, 8 a.m. for courthouse arrival, 1:30 p.m. for the transition to police headquarters. Every detail had been considered, every timing calculated for maximum impact. "Maya, tomorrow you'll see something that doesn't happen often enough in our world. You'll see a black woman not just demand respect, but command it from a position of undeniable authority." Sarah closed the Kane personnel file and placed it in her briefcase next to her speech for the swearing-in ceremony. 2 documents that would end one career and officially begin another. "What happens to Officer Kane after tomorrow?" Sarah's expression was thoughtful but resolute. "He faces the consequences of his actions. Real consequences, from someone who has the power to enforce them." As midnight approached, Sarah reviewed her timeline one final time. Court testimony in the morning, building the case methodically. Then, at exactly 2 p.m., the moment when Marcus Kane would discover that the woman he'd humiliated was about to become the most powerful person in his professional world. "Tomorrow at 2 p.m., Sarah said quietly, "everything changes." She turned off the lights in her office, but the weight of tomorrow's revelation filled the darkness. Marcus Kane had no idea that his victim was about to become his judge, jury, and commanding officer all at once. The second day of proceedings began with a shift in momentum that Kane couldn't have anticipated. Sarah's legal team, she had quietly retained counsel for evidence presentation while maintaining her pro se status for testimony, entered the courtroom carrying boxes of materials that made Kane's confidence begin to crack. Attorney Williams, a respected civil rights lawyer who'd been working behind the scenes with Sarah, approached the bench with the gravity of someone about to detonate a bomb. "Your Honor, we have obtained significant evidence that directly contradicts the defendant's testimony and reveals a disturbing pattern of misconduct that extends far beyond this single incident." Peterson immediately objected. "Your Honor, any additional evidence should have been disclosed during discovery. The evidence was obtained through public records requests that were fulfilled yesterday evening," Williams replied smoothly. "We're prepared to authenticate everything through proper channels." Judge Martinez nodded. "Proceed, but I want a proper foundation for all exhibits." Williams moved to the prosecution table where a laptop was connected to the courtroom's display system. "Your Honor, we will present unedited security footage from 4 different camera angles at the federal courthouse, obtained directly from the courthouse security office." Kane's face went pale. His edited body cam footage had conveniently started after his initial confrontation with Sarah, but courthouse security cameras ran continuously. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Williams began, "you are about to see what really happened on March 15th. The first video began playing. The timestamp showed 9:14 a.m., 1 minute before Sarah's arrival. Kane was visible at his security station, laughing with a colleague about something on his phone. "Note the defendant's relaxed demeanor," Williams narrated. "He shows no signs of being on high alert for security threats." At 9:15 a.m. exactly, Sarah entered the frame. Her professional appearance and confident stride were undeniable. She approached the checkpoint with her visitor's pass already visible in her hand. The audio was crystal clear. Kane's voice. "Wrong building, sweetheart." "The food stamps office is down the street." Sarah's calm response. "I have business here." Kane, without even looking at her pass. "What business?" "Baby daddy locked up again." The jury could see Sarah's composure, her attempt to explain her legitimate purpose, Kane's escalating aggression without any provocation from her. Then came the moment that destroyed Kane's entire defense. "I'm here for a court proceeding, officer." "Sure you are. People like you don't belong in real courtrooms." "People like me? Don't play dumb. This isn't some ghetto drama show." And then, with Sarah standing completely still, her hands at her sides, Kane's open palm struck her face with a sharp crack that echoed through the courthouse lobby. The jury watched in stunned silence as Sarah touched her cheek, collected her scattered papers with dignity, and quietly read Kane's name tag before walking away. Williams paused the video. "Ladies and gentlemen, Officer Kane testified under oath that Ms. Washington was aggressive, threatening, and advancing toward him. The video evidence clearly shows this testimony was false." Peterson was frantically whispering with Kane, whose face had gone from pale to ashen gray. Williams continued with additional evidence that made Kane's situation progressively worse. "We also obtained Officer Kane's complete body cam footage from that day." The defense's edited version played side by side with the complete footage. The manipulation was obvious. Critical portions showing Kane's verbal abuse and the unprovoked slap had been deliberately removed. The defense presented edited footage that removed the most damaging evidence of Officer Kane's misconduct. This represents not just perjury, but tampering with evidence in a federal proceeding. Medical examiner Dr. Patricia Carter took the stand to testify about Sarah's injuries. Her analysis was damning. The bruising pattern on Miss Washington's face is entirely consistent with being struck by an open palm. The force required to create this level of tissue damage indicates significant impact. There are no defensive wounds or signs that Miss Washington was engaged in any physical struggle. Dr. Carter displayed enhanced photographs that showed the clear outline of fingers across Sarah's cheek. This injury pattern is impossible to fake and completely contradicts any claim of mutual combat or defensive action. But Williams wasn't finished. The next witness was Janet Morrison, the court clerk who'd worked at the courthouse for 15 years. Miss Morrison, did you witness the incident between Officer Kane and Ms. Washington? I saw the whole thing. I was coming back from lunch and heard Officer Kane making those awful comments. That poor woman never did anything wrong. In your 15 years working here, have you observed similar incidents involving Officer Kane? Peterson objected, but the judge allowed the testimony as relevant to pattern evidence. Oh yes, Kane's been doing this for years, always picking on black folks, Hispanic folks, anyone he thinks doesn't belong. We've complained to his supervisors multiple times, but nothing ever happens. Morrison's testimony opened the floodgates. She identified 12 similar incidents over the past 18 months where Kane had screened people of color for additional security checks that never identified actual threats. He calls it keeping the riffraff out, but we all know what he really means. Williams presented Kane's radio chatter from that day, obtained through public records. Kane's voice was clearly audible, describing Sarah to his colleagues. Another welfare queen trying to game the system. Handled it appropriately. The final piece of evidence was a technical analysis of Kane's body cam. Digital forensics expert Robert Kim testified that the footage had been deliberately edited, with specific time segments removed and the file timestamps altered. This level of editing requires technical knowledge and intent to deceive. The missing segments were precisely those that would have shown Officer Kane's initial verbal abuse and the physical assault. Kane was visibly sweating now, his confident demeanor completely shattered. He kept glancing at the exit as if considering escape. But Williams saved the most damaging evidence for last. Through public records requests, Sarah's team had obtained Kane's complete personnel file, including the 15 misconduct complaints that had been buried or dismissed. Officer Kane has a documented history of targeting people of color for harassment disguised as security protocols. In every case, his threat assessments proved to be based on racial bias rather than actual security concerns. The pattern was undeniable. Kane consistently escalated encounters with black and Hispanic courthouse visitors while treating white visitors with routine professionalism. Internal emails showed his supervisors were aware of complaints but chose to ignore them. One email from Kane's lieutenant read, Kane's methods are questionable but effective at keeping certain elements away from the courthouse. Sometimes you have to bend the rules to maintain order. Peterson attempted damage control during cross-examination, but the evidence was overwhelming. Kane's credibility was destroyed, his pattern of abuse exposed, and his support system revealed as complicit in covering up his misconduct. Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table, checking her watch. 1:45 p.m. Her expression remained calm, but there was something in her eyes now, a quiet satisfaction of someone watching a carefully constructed plan come to fruition. The evidence phase had accomplished exactly what she'd intended. Kane wasn't just exposed as a liar and an abuser, he was revealed as part of a systemic problem that had been allowed to fester for years. In 15 minutes, the final piece of Sarah's strategy would fall into place, and Marcus Kane would learn just how catastrophically he had misjudged the woman he'd thought he could humiliate with impunity. At exactly 2 p.m., the courtroom doors opened with an authority that made everyone turn. Police Commissioner Reynolds entered, his dress uniform crisp and commanding, followed by 2 senior officials carrying a formal document case. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from legal proceedings to something far more significant. Judge Martinez looked puzzled. Commissioner Reynolds, this is highly irregular. We're in the middle of proceedings. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but I have an official announcement that directly pertains to these proceedings and cannot be delayed. Sarah Washington slowly rose from the plaintiff's table, her movement drawing every eye in the courtroom. For the first time since the trial began, Kane noticed something different about her posture. Not the posture of a victim seeking justice, but the bearing of someone who commanded it. Commissioner Reynolds' voice carried through the silent courtroom with formal authority. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to announce that effective immediately, Sarah Elizabeth Washington has been sworn in as the new chief of police for our metropolitan area. The words hit the courtroom like a physical force. Gasps erupted from the gallery. The jury members' eyes widened in shock. Peterson's mouth fell open. But Kane's reaction was the most dramatic. His face drained of all color as reality crashed down on him like a collapsing building. Sarah reached for her blazer and removed it with deliberate precision. Underneath was her dress uniform, midnight blue with polished silver buttons and 3 stars gleaming on each shoulder. 20 years of service ribbons decorated her chest, including commendations for bravery, community service, and leadership excellence. The transformation was stunning. The plaintiff seeking justice had become the ultimate authority figure in law enforcement. The woman Kane had dismissed as belonging at the welfare office was now the highest-ranking police officer in the jurisdiction. "Chief Washington," Judge Martinez said, clearly struggling to process the revelation, "would you please confirm your new position for the record?" Sarah's voice carried a new weight of authority that filled every corner of the courtroom. "Yes, Your Honor. I am Sarah Elizabeth Washington, Chief of Police, sworn in this morning with full authority over all departmental personnel and operations." Her eyes found Kane's across the courtroom. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. "This includes," Sarah continued with quiet precision, "full supervisory authority over Officer Marcus Kane and the power to make immediate personnel decisions regarding his continued employment." Kane's breathing became shallow and rapid. The woman he had slapped, humiliated, and dismissed as unworthy of basic human respect was now his commanding officer. Every racist assumption, every degrading comment, every moment of abuse had been directed at the person who would now determine his professional fate. Commissioner Reynolds stepped forward. Chief Washington's first official act was to request a comprehensive review of all pending misconduct cases, with particular attention to patterns of discriminatory behavior. Sarah's briefcase, which had seemed impressive before, now revealed its true significance. She opened it to reveal not just legal documents, but official police files, policy manuals, and reform implementation plans. This wasn't the preparation of a plaintiff. This was the strategic planning of a new chief executive. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "I believe this information provides important context for understanding why Officer Kane's behavior represents not just individual misconduct, but a systemic failure that I have been brought in to address." Peterson, still reeling from the revelation, attempted to salvage something from the wreckage. "Your Honor, this is clearly a conflict of interest. The plaintiff cannot also be the defendant's supervisor." Sarah's response was swift and legally precise. "Counselor, my appointment as chief occurred after the incident in question and after this lawsuit was filed. There is no legal conflict, only accountability." Kane finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. You planned this whole thing." Sarah turned to face him directly, her 3 stars catching the courtroom lights. "Officer Kane, I plan to seek justice for an unprovoked assault. The fact that you assaulted your future commanding officer speaks to your judgment, not my planning." The power dynamic had shifted so completely that it seemed to alter the very physics of the room. Kane, who had entered these proceedings as a confident defendant backed by 20 years of institutional protection, was now a subordinate officer facing his new chief in federal court after being exposed as a liar and an abuser. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, "effective immediately, you are suspended without pay pending the outcome of these proceedings and a comprehensive internal investigation into the pattern of misconduct revealed by today's evidence." Kane's lawyer was frantically shuffling papers, clearly unprepared for this development. The jury sat transfixed, watching a real-time demonstration of justice and accountability that none of them had ever witnessed. Sarah checked her watch one final time. 2:05 p.m. Everything had gone exactly according to plan. The woman Marcus Kane had thought he could humiliate with impunity had just revealed herself as the most powerful person in his professional world. His career, his reputation, and his future were now in the hands of the person he'd treated as less than human. Justice was about to be served by the very person Kane had wronged, and she had the authority to make it stick. With her new authority revealed, Sarah Washington approached the witness stand where Marcus Kane sat like a cornered animal. The roles had reversed so completely that the courtroom felt like a different universe from an hour earlier. Now it was Chief Washington conducting what amounted to an official investigation into her own assault. "Officer Kane," Sarah began, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of command, "let's discuss your pattern of behavior toward people of color at the courthouse." Peterson objected weakly. "Your Honor, the plaintiff cannot interrogate the defendant." "Your Honor," Sarah replied smoothly, "I am now appearing in my capacity as Chief of Police conducting official questioning of a subordinate officer regarding documented misconduct. This is within my administrative authority." Judge Martinez, still processing the unprecedented situation, allowed the questioning to continue. Sarah opened a thick file that Kane now recognized with growing horror, his complete personnel record. "Officer Kane, in your 20-year career, how many misconduct complaints have been filed against you?" Kane's voice was barely audible. I don't recall the exact number. Let me refresh your memory. 15 formal complaints, all involving allegations of discriminatory treatment toward minorities. Would you like me to read them aloud?" Kane's hands trembled as Sarah methodically reviewed each incident. The pattern was undeniable and damning. March 2019. Maria Gonzalez, a federal attorney, filed a complaint after you demanded to see her real identification, claiming her bar card was suspicious. July 2020. Doctor. James Mitchell, an African-American federal judge, reported that you questioned his right to enter the courthouse through the main entrance. October 2022. Professor Angela Davis, a constitutional law expert testifying in a federal case, was subjected to a cavity search based on your suspicion that she was smuggling contraband. With each case, Kane sank deeper into his chair. These weren't isolated incidents. They formed a clear pattern of racial profiling that had been systematically ignored by his supervisors. "Officer Kane, in 20 years of service, have you ever filed a misconduct report against a white person for suspicious behavior at the courthouse?" The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Kane's silence was answer enough. Sarah continued her methodical destruction of Kane's defense. "Let's examine the financial cost of your behavior. The city has paid $2.3 million in settlements for civil rights violations connected to your actions. Were you aware of this figure?" "No, ma'am," Kane whispered. "Of course not. Because your supervisors deliberately kept this information from public view to protect your career and their own reputations." Sarah presented email chains that revealed the depth of institutional complicity. Kane's lieutenant had written, "Kane's methods keep the undesirables away." Sometimes the end justifies the means. His captain had responded, "As long as no one complains, let him handle security his way." Sarah's voice grew harder. "Officer Kane, you didn't just abuse individual citizens. You trained junior officers in discriminatory practices. How many officers did you mentor in your screening techniques?" Kane's lawyer attempted to object, but Kane was beyond help now. 5 or 6, he admitted. "And did you teach them to profile based on race?" "I taught them to identify threats." "Threats?" Sarah's voice carried lethal precision. Dr. Mitchell was a threat? Was Professor Davis a threat? Maria Gonzalez, who prosecuted federal crimes for 12 years, was a threat. Each name hit Kane like a physical blow. These weren't anonymous victims. They were accomplished professionals who'd been humiliated by his prejudice. Sarah pulled out victim impact statements that painted a devastating picture of Kane's effect on the community. Parents are afraid to bring their children to the courthouse. professionals who changed their court schedules to avoid Kane's shifts, law students who questioned whether the justice system truly served everyone equally. Officer Kane, do you understand that your actions damaged not just individual citizens, but public trust in law enforcement itself? Kane was crying now, the weight of his exposed behavior crushing whatever remained of his dignity. I was trying to do my job. Your job, Sarah said with quiet fury, was to protect and serve all citizens equally. Instead, you turned the courthouse into a place where people of color were presumed guilty until proven worthy of your approval. Sarah presented financial records showing that Kane had cost the department millions in settlements, training programs, and administrative overhead. His discriminatory behavior had become a budget line item. Officer Kane, effective immediately, you are terminated from the police department for conduct unbecoming, a pattern of civil rights violations, and bringing dishonor to the badge. The words hit Kane like a final judgment. 20 years of career, pension, benefits, all gone in a single sentence from the woman he'd thought he could humiliate without consequence. Sarah closed Kane's personnel file with finality. Badge and weapon, Officer Kane. Your law enforcement career is over. Kane's transformation from confident abuser to broken ex-cop was complete. The system that had protected him for decades had finally found someone with both the authority and the courage to hold him accountable. The packed courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Chief Sarah Washington prepared to deliver her closing argument. Media crews had arrived after word of the dramatic identity reveal spread, and community members filled every available seat. This had become more than a civil rights case. It was a referendum on police accountability and justice itself. Sarah stood before the jury, her 3 stars reflecting the courtroom lights, but her demeanor remained grounded and accessible despite her revealed authority. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, 3 hours ago I stood before you as a plaintiff seeking justice for an unprovoked assault. I stand before you now as chief of police, but my message remains the same. No one is above accountability, regardless of their badge or position. Her voice carried both personal conviction and professional authority. You have seen overwhelming evidence that Officer Kane committed assault and violated my civil rights. But this case represents something larger than one incident between 2 people. Sarah gestured toward Kane, who sat slumped in defeat at the defendant's table. Officer Kane believed he could act with impunity because the system had always protected him. 15 complaints ignored. $2.3 million in taxpayer money spent covering up his misconduct. Junior officers trained in his discriminatory methods. The jury listened intently as Sarah painted the broader picture. This case is about whether we accept a justice system where some people are presumed worthy of respect while others must earn it through proving their status. Officer Kane didn't assault me because I was threatening. He assaulted me because he assumed I didn't belong. Sarah's voice grew stronger. When Officer Kane told me the food stamps office was down the street, he revealed his worldview. When he asked about my baby daddy, he exposed his prejudices. When he struck me for showing legitimate identification, he demonstrated that to him, I wasn't deserving of basic human dignity. She moved closer to the jury box. The defense wants you to believe this was a misunderstanding, that Officer Kane was just doing his job. But his job was never to humiliate citizens based on their appearance. His job was to protect and serve everyone equally. Sarah opened her briefcase one final time, pulling out the original visitor's pass that Kane had struck from her hand. This piece of paper represents more than just my right to enter a courthouse. It represents every citizen's right to access justice without being presumed unworthy because of their race. Peterson rose for his closing argument, but his position had become hopeless. Ladies and gentlemen, Officer Kane made a mistake, but destroying a 20-year career over one incident serves no one's interests. The words felt hollow in the face of the evidence presented. Peterson tried to portray Kane as a dedicated public servant overwhelmed by stress, but the pattern of misconduct made such arguments laughable. My client asks for your understanding and forgiveness. He has a family to support and has dedicated his life to public service. Sarah's rebuttal was swift and decisive. Counselor speaks of Officer Kane's family, but what about the families he terrorized? What about Dr. Mitchell's children, who watched their father be humiliated for the crime of being black in a courthouse? What about Professor Davis's students, who learned that expertise and credentials don't protect you from prejudice? The emotional weight of Sarah's words filled the courtroom. Forgiveness is important, but it cannot come without accountability. Officer Kane had 20 years to change his behavior, 20 years of complaints that should have prompted reflection and reform. Instead, he doubled down on discrimination. Sarah's closing was reaching its crescendo. I became a police officer 20 years ago because I believed in justice. I pursued law enforcement leadership because I wanted to ensure that the badge represents protection for all citizens, not intimidation for some. Her voice carried both personal pain and professional resolve. Today, you have the power to send a message that abuse of authority will not be tolerated, that civil rights violations have real consequences, and that justice applies to everyone equally. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood with the gravity of someone announcing a historic verdict. In the matter of Washington versus Kane, we find the defendant liable for assault and civil rights violations. We award damages in the amount of $500,000 and recommend immediate criminal charges. The courtroom erupted. Community members cheered. Media crews scrambled for reactions, and Kane's remaining supporters sat in stunned silence. But Sarah's response surprised everyone. She stood and addressed the court directly. Your Honor, I respectfully decline the monetary damages. I request that the awarded amount be directed to establishing a police bias training program and civilian oversight committee. Judge Martinez nodded approvingly. So ordered. The court also recommends that the U.S. Attorney's Office pursue criminal charges for assault under color of authority and civil rights violations. Kane was immediately taken into custody as federal marshals moved to arrest him. The man who had entered the courthouse that morning as an officer with arresting power was leaving in handcuffs. Sarah addressed the media outside the courthouse, flanked by community leaders and civil rights advocates. Today's verdict sends a clear message that law enforcement officers are not above the law they swore to uphold. As Chief of Police, I commit to implementing comprehensive reforms to ensure this pattern of abuse never repeats. A reporter shouted a question. Chief Washington, do you see this as personal vindication? Sarah's response encapsulated the day's larger meaning. This isn't about personal vindication. This is about institutional accountability. Officer Kane's behavior was a symptom of a system that tolerated discrimination. Today, that system begins to change. The crowd's applause echoed through the courthouse plaza as Sarah Washington, no longer just a victim seeking justice, but a leader with the power to enforce it, outlined her vision for police reform and community healing. Marcus Kane's reign of terror was over, and a new era of accountability had begun. 6 months after the courthouse steps echoed with applause for justice served, the transformation was remarkable. Marcus Kane was serving an 18-month federal sentence for assault under color of authority and civil rights violations. His pension had been revoked, his law enforcement certification permanently stripped. The man who once terrorized courthouse visitors now worked in the prison laundry, his uniform replaced with an orange jumpsuit, his authority reduced to nothing. Kane's family had paid the ultimate price for his prejudice. His wife filed for divorce after the trial, unable to face the community shame of being married to a convicted civil rights violator. His children changed their last name and moved across the country to escape the notoriety of their father's disgrace. But the more important changes were happening in the department chief Sarah Washington now led. Courthouse security incidents involving people of color had dropped by 78% under new protocols that emphasized dignity and respect for all visitors. The bias training program funded by Kane's lawsuit settlement had become a model copied by police departments nationwide. Sarah stood before the latest police academy graduating class, looking out at the most diverse group of recruits in the department's history. 40% were women, 60% were people of color, and all had been selected based on character, intelligence, and commitment to constitutional policing. Officers, Sarah addressed the graduates, you wear a badge that represents the highest ideals of public service. It does not grant you authority over people, it grants you authority to serve people. The transformation extended beyond individual officers to systemic change. Sarah had implemented civilian oversight committees, mandatory body cameras with third-party storage, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. 3 supervisors who had enabled Kane's misconduct were terminated, sending a clear message that institutional cover-ups would no longer be tolerated. The $500,000 settlement had funded not just training programs, but also community healing initiatives. Former victims of police misconduct now participated in dialogue sessions with officers, building bridges between law enforcement and the communities they served. Maya Washington watched her mother's swearing-in ceremony with pride that extended beyond familial admiration. She was witnessing history, not just the rise of the first black female police chief in their city, but the emergence of a leader who proved that justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied. Sarah's story had become a symbol of hope shared millions of times across social media. The original courthouse video, now viewed with full context, served as a powerful reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that everyone deserves dignity regardless of assumptions about their status. Speaking at a national police reform conference, Sarah reflected on the journey from victim to victor to visionary. Change doesn't happen because we hope for it. Change happens because we demand it, fight for it, and refuse to accept that this is just how things are. The audience of police chiefs, community leaders, and civil rights advocates gave her a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Justice isn't just about punishment, Sarah concluded. It's about progress. It's about ensuring that what happened to me never happens to anyone else. If this story inspired you, please share it with others who need to see that justice is possible, even when the odds seem impossible. Like this video if you believe in accountability, subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage overcoming corruption, and hit the notification bell so you never miss when ordinary people do extraordinary things. Comment below. Have you ever been underestimated because of how others saw you? How did you prove them wrong? Next week, we'll bring you another incredible story. Judge dismisses black student's case until she reveals she's Harvard Law Review editor. You won't want to miss how this brilliant young woman turned the tables on a system that tried to silence her voice. Remember, justice may be slow, but it's worth fighting for. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and never let anyone convince you that you don't belong where you have every right to be.
Reality isn't always easy to hear, but that's exactly why we tell it. At Black Voices Uncut, we go beyond the surface, showing what others won't. If you value unfiltered truth, hit like, comment your perspective, and subscribe. Every voice matters, and every truth deserves to be heard.